Welcome to Keeping the World Company on ThinkTech Hawaii. I'm your host, Jay Fidell. Today we'll talk about possible scenarios for Ukraine peace negotiations. What are the options for Putin, Zelensky, and Trump? Our guest for the show is Jean Rosenfeld, independent scholar. Welcome to the show, Jean.
Thank you, Jay.
This subject and these scenarios are in play and will be in play up to and including and certainly just after January 20th, Inauguration Day. So it's important that we follow them so we can understand the considerations and strategies for each of the players. So the first thing to identify is what is the configuration right now? How are each of them doing? What are the positions they have expressed rhetorically? Can you talk about that?
Well, we know that Volodymyr Zelensky did say in November that he was open to negotiations. There has been no such initiative from Putin. I don't think Putin wants to look weak because he's had a series of setbacks recently with this plane crash. He doesn't have good relationships with the different stands in Central Asia. They would really like to be free from his influence, especially Kazakhstan. And so he is in a weakened position also because he's had to rely on North Korean troops to protect the borders of Kursk, where Ukraine has infiltrated, taking a huge risk, taking men away from the eastern front lines that Russia has been aggrandizing and increasing, and making a sally to the north where they grabbed Kursk. And people scratched their heads over that, thinking maybe he did that so he would have a bone in the negotiations to trade with Russia for territory. But in fact, he did something else recently too. He cut off the gas line that went through Ukraine to supply natural gas to Europe. Most people don't know that Zelensky kept that line open during the war so far, but that line is in Kursk, and he's cut off that line now. So there are no more gas lines taking Russian gas to Europe.
And that means that the money that Russia gets from all those countries, including the countries that the pipeline flows through, that money has stopped, and it's millions every day. So that is going to affect Russia's economy and its cash position right now, starting January. So I think it was a smart move by Zelensky. I mean, he's saying, I can't stand the idea that I'm allowing them to collect all these gas charges and use that money against me in the war.
Well, yes, and you recall that earlier there was the cutting of the gas line in the Baltic Sea to Europe through the north part of Europe from Russia. And it turned out that was a sabotage by Ukraine. So one way Ukraine has of fighting Russia, which is, of course, a much greater power and has many more resources and options than Ukraine does, is by attacking the gas infrastructure and the economic, financial gains from selling their gas to Europe. That in itself is not enough, though, to put Zelensky in a position of strength entering into negotiations, because actually Putin's strategy, also asymmetric strategy of changing minds in the United States, party, the GOP party, which has largely been taken over by MAGA and Trump, and changing their minds toward providing aid for Ukraine, because this last summer, there was a terrible delay in aid for Ukraine, as a result of which Russia has been able to dig in to its front lines in the east and to absorb more territory in eastern Ukraine than it had before. So Russia has made gains in territory. Ukraine and the United States and the West have made gains in financially impacting Russia. But they've also done something rather subtle that no one has taken note of. They have created a fault line between China and Russia. Putin gives annual addresses that are very important to the world. And in his last annual address, he says nothing about his partnership with China, which is a departure from previous addresses he's given at the Valdai conference. And what this indicates is that there is some tension. And part of that tension is his outreach to North Korea, because China has had some trouble controlling North Korea in its arms buildup, since North Korea is, in essence, somewhat of a satellite geographically and in terms of power to China. That's disturbing to China. But when Russia reaches beyond China to North Korea and supports North Korea in some transactional way in return for troops that it needed to defend Kursk, then China feels left out of the equation. And I think there's something going on there that people are losing sight of. So I think there are a lot of indications that Putin is weakened and does not want to connote weakness. Zelensky has got his back against the wall, and the war is sort of at a stalemate right now. But the initiative for negotiations seems to be coming from Trump.
Yeah, let's talk about Trump. Trump's relationship with Zelensky, all his, talk about how he is going to settle that war on day one somehow, or terminate the war on day one, and all the signals that he's giving about how he supports Putin. It's a mixed bag, of course, and he's got to deal with the people in this country, but a lot of people in this country, support Putin. That's really crazy, but they support Putin because they think Trump supports Putin. So what's the deal between Trump and Putin? Do we know?
No. However, we do know that Trump is now angling. He is now president for the second time. He's now angling to be the biggest strongman. And I think he wants to be a bigger strongman than Putin is. He's copying a lot of Putin's ways and means of increasing and consolidating power simply by aligning himself with some very powerful oligarchs in this country, which is exactly what Putin did. So you consolidate the financial power in a country, that is real power. And it can translate into autocracy and political power. Now, we have institutions that guard against a president becoming an imperial presidency. Nevertheless, Trump has shown his genius for overthrowing guardrails, institutions, norms, the rule of law. So we're in for kind of an E-ride here. Nevertheless, I think what's happening with the negotiation is that Trump does not want a foreign entanglement. He wants to do deals. He doesn't want to have to put money or armies out there. And he believes wrongly or rightly that the United States is in a good geographical position not to be threatened by any other power, because we are sitting here between two oceans, which of course is a very, very antiquated idea and has no bearing in reality when air wars and satellite wars and drones are all the name of the game today. So one way or another, he's seeking to engage Putin and Zelensky, and his advisors, his three main advisors, have come up with different ideas, but they all amount to one thing, basically, which is keep Ukraine out of NATO, try to guarantee Ukraine's security by establishing a non-militarized or a militarized zone between on the front lines, so that Ukraine has security guarantees. Now, who's going to guarantee that security? They don't say without NATO. What are they going to do? I mean, people who know Russia, know Putin, realize that anything that's an agreement on paper, Putin will just ignore, because he's done that in the past. So the only real guarantee for Ukraine is one of two things. And Trump isn't wanting to give either one of those. One is membership in NATO, which Zelensky is really trying for with Western Europe and Europe in general. And the other thing is some kind of one-on-one agreement between the United States and Ukraine that if Russia were to resume hostilities toward Ukraine, the United States would come in and stop them. And that seems even more unlikely given Trump's view. I think we're going to learn more about what Trump thinks he's going to do on day one. He's holding this enormous rally the day before the inauguration. I'm waiting for that because I think he's going to say some things we need to listen to. Why would he be doing that when he's giving an inauguration speech the next day? I would believe what he says at the rally more than what he says in the inauguration speech.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Inauguration is just a swear-in sort of thing and very ceremonial, but the rally could be anything he wants it to be. One thing you mentioned, which I think we should just take a look at, is that his advisors these days include Musk, and Musk has supported the AI, the Alternatives for Deutschland, AFD. Musk has supported AFD, and AFD is a fascist or semi-fascist organization that actually supports Putin. Does that mean that Musk supports Putin? Other, people who affirmatively, actively support Putin in this government?
If these guys operated on logic, that syllogism would hold, that they don't. Uh, they're incoherent in their foreign policy, they're incoherent in their political policy, because that's not what they're about. What they're about is control of power in the world and over other economies and their own bottom line and financial seat of power. It's oligarchy in the starkest terms. And Russia, as we know, operates by oligarchy. And now Trump tends to be reaching out and operating by oligarchy. He got into power basically through donations from Musk and Thiel, who supported J.D. Vance and others. This is all a conspiracy of elites, real elites in the real world, to put a man into the presidency who is going to make and do transactions that benefit them. And Putin understands that. So he's a lot more experienced and a lot wiser than Trump is. What he's going to try to do is put into place a very old protocol that Russia used during the time of the Soviet Union to take over the satellites in Eastern Europe. I was just in Eastern Europe recently. And the takeover of Lithuania, which is a key small country in terms of the Russia-West confrontation. It is the country that supports Ukraine the most because it knows the Russians best. They were occupied by the Russians for 50 years. They never wanted to be occupied by the Russians because they had experienced that before, but they were too small to do anything about it. And the way the Russians took over Lithuania is instructive because I think that's what Putin will aim for in these talks. He will try to convince Trump that what he wants from him is a guarantee of Ukraine's neutrality. Watch that word. To demilitarize Ukraine, to put some things down on paper that sound very pretty and nice, to declare a certain degree of winning over Western, quote unquote, and NATO aggression, and take that home for domestic consumption. But what it really would amount to is that over time, Russia would put its own people in place in the army and Ukraine's military and in Ukraine's government, and that it would become like Belarus, a kind of satellite. Because what people don't understand in our government is that Belarus and Ukraine are different from all other countries that Russia has tried to control. Russia considers Ukraine and Belarus part of old Russia, part of Muscovy, and they feel they have historic reasons for dominating both countries, and that these countries really are part of Russia.
What does Trump owe Putin? I think there are things out there in the transactional world. Of course, he'd like to follow through on his Trump Towers in Moscow. That's a deal that's still in play. That means a lot of money for Trump ultimately. And I think that that Putin helped him win affirmatively with social media and internet plays of one kind or another. And as a matter of fact, I understand the Department of Justice is looking into that and is considering or has already indicted Russians who have been involved in the effort to compromise the election last November. So I think Putin has a claim on Trump, and Trump owes Putin not only for the elections before, and I believe he was involved in both the 2016 and the 2020 election, but also the 2024 election. It's a regular thing, and he's indebted. Don't you think he's indebted to Putin?
Yes and no. Um, it looks like that. But if you consider the personalities of these men and the way they relate to everyone when they do deals, is once they are in a winning position, they simply ignore the other party or the other what they told the other party. I mean, their words carry no guarantee. What they put down on paper carries no guarantee. Each transaction is looked at in isolation as zero sum game. And when it's to their advantage, they will make up, kiss and make up, as Trump has done many times with most recently Elon Musk. So you see the way they operate. And sociopaths operate differently from normal people. They're not beholden to anybody except themselves. And
Mm.
their transactions are like, two predators looking at one another. And when it's convenient, they will align. And when it's not convenient, they will confront. Now, I don't think either one of these men wants war or has the wherewithal to wage war. So the confrontations are going to look different.
You talked about what they say in public, especially. And I wonder if you could tell us what Putin said in his recent remarks, I guess within the last few days, about the state of the nation of Russia, why he said these things and what he was saying and what he was not saying and what the style of it was, what it revealed about his approach and his condition.
This address to the Valdai Club, which is in essence Russia's answer to Davos, Switzerland, where the Western leaders of various segments of power, financial, intellectual, political, come together and exchange ideas. The Valdai Club was set up by Putin 20 some years ago, 20 to 25 years ago. They just celebrated an anniversary. And each year he invites all of the countries of the world to attend. And he's trying to set up his alignment with a different pole against the West. He is really all about confronting, weakening, and overtaking the West. And he does this in the name of something called multipolarity. He maintains that we're a hegemon and we're unipolar and we run the world and so forth and so on. Sort of like the old thing about the Jews run the world. Well, Putin, it's the West runs the world. And he wants to basically attract the global South, and he's polarized the world basically. But what he said recently is different from his other addresses. He's reiterating the same utopian vision of, in essence, eradicating the Pax Americana, which we set up after World War II to avoid World War III. And we set up the United Nations, we set up the World Bank, we eventually encouraged unity in Europe, the European Union, we maintain NATO. All of these things are standing in the way of Russia claiming that it is a great power and its civilization should enlighten the world. Being aimed at these institutions and overthrowing the West is a divide and conquer campaign where you intervene domestically, as he has done, and divide and polarize the United States. And he's attempting to do that in Europe through these right-wing parties that are coming to power in Germany and France, have come to power in Italy. and are basically, um, they did come to power in Ukraine, which is one reason why he went into Ukraine and Crimea. So he has like fifth columns, what we used to call fifth columns in various Western countries to weaken and destroy us. And then on the larger stage at Valdai, he puts forth this utopian vision. We'll get rid of the hegemon of the world, the United States. We will, in essence, get rid of the currency of the dollar. Now, in this address, he didn't say he would get rid of the dollar. I suspect that in this conference, he didn't mention China and he didn't want to get rid of the dollar and he didn't get into specifics because he knows this agreement with China right now is not working, that China is really looking, in essence, to have its own independent relationship with the United States and be one of the two great powers in the world. So I sense this is different. The other thing that's different about this address is he rambles. It's incoherent almost. He goes back and forth to his utopian vision and his hatred of the West. It's very bipolar. And it kind of makes you think that perhaps the loss of Syria, the downing of the airplane, the stalemate in Ukraine, and other things are really getting to him so that he is in a weakened position. He does not seem to be on top of his game.
Hmm. Gee, it sounds like Trump in a way. Um, maybe it's his age. Maybe he's declining mentally, like Trump. I wonder about that.
I think he's basically a person under great stress. We don't really know what's going on internally in Russia either.
Mhm. What about Western Europe? They see all these things happening, and I wonder about how they feel about him. Perhaps they have even less trust in him these days, less respect or fear of him these days. Is NATO stronger, weaker? Is the EU still strong? Because the talk is that it's decline. The economy of Western Europe is declining. To say nothing of the fragmentation of various governments in various countries. How is Western Europe doing? How is its view of Putin doing?
Western Europe at the moment is doing fine. Um, NATO is strong. It's even stronger than it was because Finland and Sweden joined and extended NATO's border with Russia. The European Union is strong. They just elected a new president who's an enlightened individual. But there is an unease in Europe. It's very interesting. It mirrors the unease in the United States, I found when I was in Germany talking to people. It all looks good. Everything's operating fine. People are living good lives. They have the material well-being. They have jobs. Sure, there are the ordinary stresses, and there's not as much poverty as there is in the United States. But there's the uncertainty about the future. This is the big deal. People are very much on edge about the future. I think the kind of war that has evolved in Ukraine and Gaza, this kind of total war with very high casualties, has shocked these generations. They haven't seen anything like this in their lifetimes. They don't remember the destruction, the utter destruction in World War II. They can't they they don't they can't comprehend it. And so it gives them a great sense of unease about their themselves personally. And so when you get these anti-government, anti-elite, anti-norm organizations, political organizations, populist organizations, attempting um, to increase their membership based on grievance, negativity, uncertainty, hatred of the immigrant, destabilizing influences when new cultures come in. This all contributes to an unease that people feel, and they really don't know where to turn. So they turn to those who say they have the answers.
So one of these days, the three of them are going to have to get together. I hope it's the three of them will include Zelensky. I mean, it troubles me that Trump may deal directly with Putin, but that's not going to go anywhere. Suppose the three of them got together, such as they did at Notre Dame not too long ago. What would be the circumstances of that meeting? What would be the options on the table, if you will, at that meeting? What would be the moves? And how does it spring off the one at Notre Dame, or is it completely different?
Well, they may have different reasons for being there. Trump says he's going to do this on day one. We know he is. He's very impatient. He seems to have ADHD. Likes things to happen fast. And the people in the know, like one from Rand, who wrote an article for Foreign Affairs, Samuel Cherop, feels that you can never have a negotiation like this in a day. It's going to be at least a year. And so that may be Trump wanting to maybe make this very personal, um, and keep it personal rather than going through a contact group. But people who are skilled in diplomacy know that you have to prepare by setting up what's called a contact group between the different parties. And that is where each party sets forth a team that interacts with one another, and then the team organizes things. And when it gets to a certain state of organization, then it goes to the top guys. That doesn't seem to be Trump's view. Putin doesn't want to look weak. He doesn't want to initiate a negotiation. He wants to look like he's doing people a favor by negotiating. Zelensky is willing to negotiate, but he's put things on the table right off the bat that are non-starters for Russia. Namely, he wants to join NATO, and he doesn't want to give up territory. Now, Michael McFaul, who is ambassador to Russia, wrote an article recently. He's at the Hoover Institution right now, saying that he thinks Zelensky might be convinced to give up some territory in order to be able to join NATO. He is foursquare behind Ukraine joining NATO because he thinks that's the only way war is not going to start up again with Russia in the future. That Russia is not going to let Ukraine go free if they're not part of NATO. And Russia really doesn't feel the threat of NATO. But he does feel that Zelensky needs to give up territory. 88% of the Ukrainian people are not willing to give up territory right now, but that could change. Nevertheless, they all seem to have different ways. And what they're first doing when they meet is to try to figure out how to have a negotiation. You have to negotiate to get to the negotiation. And that's what I think they're doing, and feeling out one another and then going home to think about it all over again.
You said that Trump marched to a different drummer. Ordinarily, in the classical mode of foreign policy development and foreign relations, a negotiation like this could easily take a year. But these are different times, and the norms have been thrown to the wind. And there's every reason for each one of the three of them to move more quickly than that, to cut the corners and bypass the regular negotiating systems. Don't you think that's going to happen here too?
Yes and no. Again, it depends on what the goal of the negotiation is. Step one is to get to the table. Step two is to have a temporary ceasefire. And then the question is that ceasefire going to be permanent, like the ceasefire between the truce between North and South Korea, which has allowed South Korea to develop, but has led to the militarization of North Korea and its increasing threat to the world. So it's not a satisfactory thing just to have a permanent truce. And the third thing is to normalize the ceasefire into an end to the war. And the fourth thing, according to Samuel Cherop of Rand, who wrote the article in Foreign Affairs, is to work out the issues between Russia and the West, because this war is really all about Russia vis-a-vis the West. And in that respect, NATO becomes the symbol of that. And what happens with Ukraine, whether it becomes a satellite of Russia again, which is what Putin's aim truly is, to keep the territory, all of Ukraine, to infiltrate, absorb Ukraine without war by other hybrid means. If he gets a settlement that with a neophyte like Trump, who doesn't know any better, and signs things away and sells neutrality to the United States. That's what I want to listen to his rally. How is he going to characterize this peace with Russia? I'd like to hear what his idea in general terms, what words he uses, because those are all code words, of course.
There's this bill, the Logan Act. It's an act, and it says ordinary citizens who don't occupy high office in this country and who are not authorized to deal with foreign governments shouldn't. They're prohibited from doing that. And if he's trying to cut some kind of deal, any kind of deal with Putin right now, Putin is an adversary to the United States for sure. He's violating the Logan Act. Any thoughts about that?
Well, we know that Musk has, according to Bob Woodward, has spoken to Putin during this time of transition. We wonder what Musk has to say. Maybe he's just weighing in to say, hey, look, we're getting our act together. We're consolidating our power in the United States, and let's work out a deal. Let's explore this a little bit more. What will you accept and not accept? How do you want to present this to your people in the world? How do we come out of this without looking weakened? Or how do we maintain relationships with you without these kinetic wars that seem to erupt by proxy? Are there other ways we can do deals? I don't know what's going on. One can speculate knowing the personalities of these people. And by the way, historians today are really looking at personalities again. They haven't done this for many years. It's been anathema in the academy to look at personalities, except for biography, of course, which is not so much history as a description and an entertainment of famous people. And they're fun to read, and sometimes they're instructive, but it's not the same thing as looking at social forces and what drives countries and powers and forces in the world. But looking at individuals who occupy these offices is important today because they do not observe the norms, precedents, laws, and rules or guidelines. They go off the road. There are no guardrails. And we have seen this. Felonies and felony accusations have not stopped Trump. And Russia, of course, is a master in the use of propaganda. And Trump is a master in the use of charismatic leadership. So we have narratives contending with one another for the minds of people who then go into the voting booth, and you have a nominal democracy. But what you really have is kind of uniformity of thought. Now, Trump has said that his inauguration speech is going to focus on unity. When he was asked, well, are you going to talk about American carnage again and division? He said, no, it's going to be on unity. Well, I want to see if it's really going to be on unity or it's going to be on uniformity, because the difference is strategic. If he's looking to convert the people in the United States to one point of view, then you know he really is an autocrat, because that's what is needed. Before Hitler could eliminate the Jews in a final solution, he had to convince the German people that they were the reason why the Germans lost World War II and were humiliated. Oh, I'm sorry, World War I, not World War II. That's he could not proceed with World War II until he had convinced his own people to accept the conspiracy theory of scapegoating of the Jews. And that was uniformity. That was his ministry of propaganda. That was Goebbels. That was deliberate. And so I look at what people think, how they operate, how they're motivated, what mythologies are circulated. We know Putin is using this mythology of Greater Russia and what's called Eurasianism to dominate the Eurasian continent and to weaken the West. So, what mythos is Trump using? Let's see.
I agree with you. There's a fair prospect that when he gets up in the inauguration, he's going to be trying to advance his own dictatorship. But really, the question is, how will this all play out for Ukraine? I mean, for example, Poland elected an anti-Putin man recently, and that moved Poland in away from the guy before, who was softer on Putin. And as you said, the Baltic countries are really terrified at what Putin may do. But I'm not so confident that NATO will actually function. It was a beautiful thing in 1945 or 46 when it was established. Maybe it was within a year of that. And it has been strong all these years. But you say Putin is a master of propaganda. He's been working on a hybrid war against the cohesion of NATO. So, Article 5 of the NATO agreement may or may not work. And so it may be less of a threat than it was a few years ago to Putin. What do you think?
Well, NATO is really the symbol of the West's strength or weakness. And how NATO comes out of this negotiation vis-a-vis Ukraine is going to be telling. The only way the West can ultimately be defeated is if it defeats itself. And Putin knows that because Russia doesn't have the manpower. They have a demographic crisis. They don't have enough births. They're the ones who need the immigrants. Nobody wants to go because they don't have the manpower. But what they're trying to do is build their military power, particularly in the Arctic, in the Mediterranean, to keep it in the Mediterranean, the Baltic Sea, the Black Sea. They've taken a real hit. I mean, Trump probably doesn't know this, but Russia's probably as weak now as it has ever been. And if we had the fortitude and the enlightenment to know that, we could be very aggressive in any negotiation with Putin over cessation of hostilities because he doesn't have the wherewithal. I mean, he's outsourcing even for manpower in this fight to North Korea. And he's not getting any support or manpower from China. Iran is under threat and is weakening. Syria is no longer a base for him. It's telling that this is the time when we have somebody who maybe won't even realize the advantages we have. And as the ISW, the Institute for the Study of War report article states, we really can win this thing if we have the fortitude to do it.
So given all of that, Gene, given the incipient power that we have, that Trump has, if you were at the table, and let's assume the table is fully populated with Trump, Zelensky, and Macron. I'm sorry, Trump, Zelensky, and Putin, maybe Macron too. Maybe somebody from Germany, who knows? Maybe somebody from NATO. But at the table, when this negotiation takes place, what should the U.S. position be? What does Trump have enough power to suggest at this negotiation? How should he want it to wind up?
I think Ukraine's not going to get out of this without sacrificing part of Eastern Ukraine. It's a wasteland now. It was the industrial base of Ukraine. Putin needs some kind of indication that he's getting something, and he occupies the territory. So that's one thing. The other thing is, at some point, something has to be worked out where Ukraine has enough of a security guarantee that this will never happen again. And the only way, I think, is for Ukraine to have a timetable for joining NATO and a demilitarized zone between the front lines and security guarantees with personnel, military personnel in Ukraine from Europe that prevent Russia from stepping over the line, because they would then be confronting Europeans who could could invoke Article 5, not Ukraine. So we need foreign troops in Ukraine on the front lines, lining the military zone, as we wait to see over time that Ukraine can join NATO. And if that's off the table for Russia, then something could be worked out with an alliance that's just as tough between certain powerful countries and Ukraine, that they would come to his aid collectively. So there are ways to do this that diplomats are very adept at. But the first thing that happens is that Trump has to stop trying to personalize this and have people like J.D. Vance and one general from the Pentagon work it out. They need the best people that they can get, a contact group, and they need a group within the United States that comes together first and figures this thing out.
Some thoughts about this. Number one is Ukraine, as you said, is a wreck. It's a train wreck. The country has been busted from its institutions to its infrastructure to its schools and hospitals. It's a train wreck, thanks to Putin. What about rebuilding? What about reparations? Who's going to pay for that? It's going to be hard for Trump with his downsized government to pay for it. Is Western Europe going to pay for it? Is there a possibility of demanding reparations? After all, one country attacked the other. Shouldn't they pay for it? It's going to cost, probably $1 trillion, maybe more, to repair the damage that Putin has, visited on all parts of Ukraine. How's that going to work in this deal?
One of the individuals who has thoughts about this has come up with the viewpoint that Russia realizes now that it's not going to get its frozen assets back from the West, and that these assets will be applied to rebuilding Ukraine. But I also have to say that rebuilding can be very generous to the individuals involved, because you got to get companies in there, you got to get materials in there, you got to have transactions, you've got to have plans. And there are already people that have been to Ukraine that are trying to set this up from the West, from Australia even, as well as the United States and Western Europe. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe Russia would be interested in getting some private individuals in there doing transactions. I mean, come on, there's so many ways you can do this, and that's what these guys are really good at. So I wouldn't worry too much about rebuilding Ukraine, because see, Ukraine is the largest country in Europe geographically. It is also potentially the richest agriculturally. It is a breadbasket, not only for Europe, but also the world. And so that was the early crisis when Russia's Black Sea fleet was blocking ships bringing wheat to Africa. That was resolved. And Ukraine really did neutralize the Black Sea fleet and keep its money coming in terms of its agricultural exports. So everybody knows that Ukraine is a very rich, potentially rich country. And, you get loans because you have a certain reputation for being able to make a profit for those people who extend the loans. And I'm sure they'll figure that one out.
Yeah. What about the Black Sea? What about Odessa? What about all the territory that Russia took while the U.S. was sleeping back in 2014? That's a key to the success of Ukraine's export agriculture, isn't it? Shouldn't that be part of this deal?
Odessa is open. The Black Sea Fleet of Russia does not control the sea. Um, they've been stopped. They have Crimea, and
Right.
that's a big bone of contention is Crimea because Ukraine really wants Crimea and control of that coast. But I don't think they're going to be able to get it in the near future. There might be some future plan put on the table. I don't know.
I meant to say Crimea, but isn't that essential to its export agriculture?
Not necessarily. They're exporting now from Odessa and other ports, as long
Hmm.
as they're not blocked from doing it.
One other thing is that we have seen Putin, not only during this war, but over the past several years, as part of his playbook, use internet hacking, use social media, electronic hybrid warfare. He started doing that long before he attacked Ukraine. And the question is whether that can be built into this peace agreement, where he simply stops trying to undermine Europe. I mean, with terror attacks and hacking and trying to bring these countries down in so many ways. Do you think that could be part of the negotiation?
I do because not necessarily stopping the troll farms in Russia because he's outsourcing to a lot of people and they'll keep up their hacking because that's what they do. That's their life. And we do it too. We just don't hear so much about it. But what really needs to stop, and probably will when there is an agreement, is the hybrid warfare and attacks that Russia is conducting by proxy in Europe. Really destructive stuff that's going on in Europe with placing bombs on airplanes, cargo airplanes, with assassinating individuals, with arsons at warehouses where material is being stored for movement to Ukraine. Um, that those kinds of overt activities by proxy will stop. What won't stop is the attempt to undermine the politics of each country in Europe so that they become more aligned with Russia's objectives in overthrowing and weakening the West and advancing its own idea of Russian civilization and what it calls multipolarity, which really means domination, and changing the currency of the world.
What about the sanctions? Would you take the sanctions off as part of this peace agreement?
Absolutely not. We are in a
Ah,
position
really? Okay.
we are in a position of strength with sanctions, and that is essential. It's brought Putin closer to being on his knees than most people realize. He is really angry about the sanctions, and his past Valdai addresses have really lit into the United States for those sanctions. You know that it's really hurting him. Whenever he complains about something, you just keep doing it because you know that's really having an impact.
What about his oil and gas sales? Would you allow him to open the valve? Would you allow Russian gas to pass into Western Europe again?
Yeah, I mean, sure. And that's a bargaining point again. I mean, it's not like Russia doesn't get money from oil and gas. It still gets money. It's got a shadow fleet that it's utilizing to send its gas and oil around the world. And it has agreements with a lot of other countries. But and also not necessarily in Western currency either. But in terms of the gas to Europe, I mean, that they both want that. Europe wants that too. And that can be a negotiating point. I mean, in terms of not giving up territory forever, of working toward a permanent end to the war, not just a ceasefire, in terms of maybe the first step is to have an agreement that Ukraine will join the European Union. And
Hmm.
from there, not having this agreement on the table that Russia will not oppose it's joining NATO down the line. There are different ways to construct these. And again, you have to be a veteran diplomat to know how to do it.
Well, I have one last question for you, Gene, and that is the mystery man here. We have so many personalities involved, but one personality who doesn't seem to be involved at all is Joe Biden, the one who should be involved, the one who should be cutting a deal, if any, the one who should be at the table right now. But he isn't. He's come to be, the ultimate lame duck. And gee whiz, why isn't he there? What could he do? What should he do? What effect could he have on all of this?
Well, he's giving the Medal of Freedom to Liz Cheney because she possibly faces some serious blowback from the next administration, and that will enhance her status and make it harder. Because the one thing that really hurt Trump was the January 6th investigation committee. I mean, that was probably the most effective oppositional movement toward Trump and his MAGA movement. And they emphasized the participation of the GOP. And this is the part of the GOP that really was Republican and not MAGA. Joe Biden can't really do very much right now. He saved his son. He's trying to save Liz Cheney. And I think he deserves a retirement in which people come to sit at his feet and learn from him. But I don't see him playing a role in the future.
No, it's not the way it works.
A direct role, an indirect role. Maybe.
Okay, this is a great discussion, very important. Thank you for all of that. We're out of time right now. We'll have to leave it there. Gene Rosenfeld, independent scholar, helping us understand what could happen, what should happen at these peace negotiations that we've heard will take place on and after the inauguration. Thank you so much, Gene. Thank you to our viewers for watching. And we'll see you soon. We'll see you more in the new year. Aloha.
Thank you, Jay.